Okay, I think we can start. I'd like to call to order the 27th public meeting of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission on September 18th, 2012. September 11th minutes, I think we don't have yet.
Don't have
right?
them. I got the.
That was our
That was a
5 hour.
really long meeting, and I
Right.
got some of the materials I needed to do the minutes yesterday. So I haven't had a chance to do it. We'll have them next time.
Is the video and the transcript, are the video and transcript posted? Okay.
They are, yes.
Great, okay. Next on our item is Springfield schedule and process, following up on our meeting last week, our long meeting last week. And you have in your packets a letter from Kevin Kennedy, the head of Planning and Economic Development for Springfield. And as you can see, I'm glad to say that they have reconsidered after our meeting and have agreed to proceed with their process, but not to submit, well, to do two things. One is to be sure that anybody that wants to be considered by them is a formal applicant, A, and B, and more importantly, that they will not have a referendum on a host community agreement or a selectee until we have completed our vetting process, which I think was the primary point that we made with them. So there's really, on this, there's not anything more for us to say, particularly on this topic. The Ethics Commission report that we're waiting on, apparently they still don't have that yet. We're supposed to have that in a couple of days. That goes to the issue of the Shefsky and Freilich procurement. But on the big issue of the incompatibility with our schedule, I think they've had a rethought it and are happy to agree with us to try to match our schedules, which is a very good development. Other things on?
I have a question for the commission and eventually, of course, for the city. But for the commission first, I was looking at the statute and section 1513, subsection 13, does speak about the election and how after a host community agreement is executed, there would be a request by the local officials, a request for an election. And the election can take place in no less than 60 days and no more than 90 days. And as it refers to this particular issue, but really for everybody, all regions, I'm curious as to what this commission should consider as being that time that elapses between a host community agreement agreed to and the election or the request for the election.
Right.
Whether the statute means, and I have the precise place where I could kind of read to, whether this shall mean immediately after or any time after. And this is a question that I wanted to pose to the group.
Right.
For us to consider, because it may have inference into what happens prior to the election, which is in Springfield or others, which is when that host community agreement is executed.
Right. I'll give my 2 cents on this, and I think then others can speak up on this. What's happening here is that there have been some communities that, for whatever reasons, good reasons, have been further down the road than others, and some of them were fairly far down the road before we even got convened. We have not yet laid out all the rules and regs to implement the legislation, and people are going ahead and making scheduling decisions and tentative decisions without us knowing, without us having put out our regs, including on things like the host community agreement. So we are in the position of trying to retrofit once in a while, and that's part of what's been going on with Springfield. But as a practical matter, Springfield is aware that the referendum is on the host community agreement. And one of the issues that they have agreed to is understanding that we may have things, we may say things in our regs about host community agreements, which could conceivably change something that they have negotiated. So as a practical matter, I think they expect not to technically implement, not to technically execute their host community agreement, so that they don't run afoul of that 60-day time frame. However, having said that, I think that as a response to this, I think I would take your suggestion. I think maybe we ought to do some kind of an advisory as we're getting up and running and writing our regs to make sure people understand that. And I think everybody will now get the message not to do referenda prior to our vetting process, but they may not make the link to the technical execution of the host community agreement. And I think clarifying that sooner than later would be a good point. That's just off the top of my head.
I'm not sure I understand the point. I'm sorry.
I think what Commissioner Zuniga is saying is that the statute calls for the referendum to happen within a certain period of time after a host community agreement is executed.
No, after a request for
an election.
For an election. So you can have.
So if you don't have the request.
Time, you can have a host community agreement negotiated, but nobody requests an election, and there is no time running. The time runs from the request. So to take your scenario and just to follow that through, a host community agreement could be executed, but conceivably, both sides might want to wait to see what our draft regulations
Right.
phase 2 look like to make sure they covered everything before they ask for a vote. So I think that's.
Well, the question that I was posing is just that. If we believe or if we should issue an advisory relative to how soon after the host community agreement is executed, should there be a request for an election? Because Commissioner McHugh is precisely correct. It's the request for the
Right.
election
Got it.
that triggers it. It's only an interim process. But if the statute intended for just what Commissioner McHugh says, allow for there to be any time between a host community agreement being executed and a request for an election, or if there can be, or it should be immediately after a host community is agreed to, an election should be requested.
Why would we care?
Because our regulations come into place relative to those, potentially, relative, that could affect those agreements.
Yes, and then, but that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the space between the time the agreement is executed and the time the request comes. That has more to do with when in that process we get our regulations published, right? I'm just trying to come to grips with why we would want to get involved in, we might want to issue a regulation. I'm just trying to understand where the fault line would be and what the considerations for the commission would be in trying to insert some regulatory mechanism in that process. And it's worth thinking about some more. But
Yeah, I'm just throwing it out there. I'm just looking for the schedule and what's upstream from the election, and it's the request, and then it's prior to the request, it's the negotiated or agreed to community agreement. There's also, elsewhere in that section, there's timeline as to when that agreement should be posted. For example, I believe the municipality should put it on a website no later than 7 days after it's signed by both parties. That's another requirement. So assuming that a host community is agreed to, post it in the website because it has to 7 days after. But then an election is not requested because that will trigger the 60 to 90 days. the more that happens, the more time that the agreement will be in the website, thus potentially informing, having a more positive effect in terms of informing the public. But then people might also forget there's a case to be made that there might be an optimum amount of time. And my question is whether the legislation intended that, or does this commission have anything to say about just what that timeline should be? Because that answers your question, but that hopefully addresses some of your question.
Well, it raises the question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that, but it certainly is something to consider as we're going through the phase 2 drafting process.
Well, I think, I thank you for clarifying, you're right. I thought what Commissioner Zuniga was saying, that the time starts to run from the execution of the agreement. That's wrong from the request. But I think this whole area is interlocking. I know from Palmer's asking questions about what do we do next? What's the sequence of events here? We know there's issues going on at Suffolk Downs. So I think this is one which may be ahead of our normal promulgation of our regs, that we need to think through a little bit, and at least make sure people understand the relationship between the host community agreement and a referendum, and the scheduling of referendums subsequent and only subsequent, which is the point we've now established, to our completed RFA 1, and these other subtleties about what starts to make the clock run. I think we could put out another sort of protocol, with clarification, like we've done on the scheduling and community mitigation funds and stuff, that would just help clarify this. And whether it's hopefully we'll have an ombudsman in the next week or two. Either that person or we could put that together quickly. In the meantime, we're doing this in one-offs. We're getting calls from people in one-offs, how do we deal with the host community agreement? So I think we just need to clarify this whole thing for everybody. I think you're right that it's confusing. There are some issues there that we have not really thought through ourselves. So unless there's something, so I think we should try to do that in the next week or so. But unless there's some particular issue on the table that we need to talk about in a public meeting, one of us can just draft up that statement, that protocol in the next week or two or next week, and try to get it out shortly thereafter.
Sure, we could do that, but when we get to the updated protocol that we're going to talk about today, there's another piece of that I'd like to talk
Okay.
about, and it ties into this big fat book.
Right. This big fat book is the draft strategic plan for regulating casino gambling in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, in case anybody wonders what we've been doing for the last few months.
So there are a couple of things I'd like to bring up when we get to that
Okay.
piece, and this fits into that,
Okay.
because I do think clarification is necessary, and I do think speed is consistent with our mission, is necessary, so, as we all do.
Right, okay. So we're going to get into that a little bit when we talk about the revised protocol that I sent around this morning, but are there anything else about this specific issue, any policy questions about this particular issue that you wanted to
Springfield,
continue to flesh out now? Or Springfield, yeah.
Well, as a reaction to last week, I wanted to debrief on some of the thoughts expressed in Springfield last week, and I think right now it might be as good time as any.
Sure.
I think the legislation is not explicit as to what the commission or a host community is explicitly expected, rather, to do with more than one proposals or more than one proponents for them. I like to highlight the fact that Springfield, with their consultants, entertained the notion or the alternative of negotiating with everybody who might be interested. That would have been, in my view, clearly what the legislation may have intended, because that would have put the matter to the voters. the legislation is silent when it comes to multiple proposals, but have they entertained all proponents prior to the RFP process that they want to do? In my view, that would have complied with the legislation by putting the matter to the voters. They said that they're not doing that alternative for 3 reasons, according to what was expressed in the meeting last week. That the matter would create voter confusion, that they would be saving resources. By conducting this RFP process, they would be saving resources, saving the commission resources. And that they would also be expediting the process for their benefit, because they want to move on a number of fronts elsewhere. And I have 3 thoughts one thought for each one of those notions. And I think that the city may be underestimating the voters, thinking that hosting this matter to the voters would create voter confusion. I'd like to believe that something like this could be structured in a way that would be clear and the voters would make an informed decision. Now, in this matter, I and the city may disagree, but I just wanted to state that they may be underestimating the voters. I think their notion that they would be saving resources is misguided, because these resources come from the operators. The money to investigate the very operators who want to play, if you will, in Massachusetts, comes from them. So they are not saving anybody but the people who want to play and are hoping to pay for play. So that's, I believe, misguided or misunderstood. And we talked about in last week relative to the expediting notion that by moving the way they want to move are not necessarily saving any time, because they agreed, apparently after this letter, that we need to do the investigations, or we need to complete the investigations ideally so that they can negotiate a host community agreement. So the 3 reasons that they cited for moving in the direction that they're moving, again, I believe are somewhat misplaced.
Other thoughts about that?
Well, I think those were issues last week that were mentioned, discussed, and but I look at this recent letter dated September 18th as a good faith effort to work with us with the concessions mentioned here, which does, in my opinion, alleviate some of the concerns that we expressed last week. Holding off the vote until after our suitability investigations, I think is a very good step. And then requiring the participants to become applicants with us when they enter their phase 2 process, I think is also an attempt to work collaboratively with us. So I shared some of your concerns last week, and I look at this as a good faith effort. That the officials heard our concerns and heard our ideas where there may be some overlap, and made some good faith efforts here to work collaboratively with us.
Anybody else?
Again, I think we were reminded at last week's meeting, and the point was made by Chairman Wagner about the authority, responsibility that are all placed with a host municipality, be it mayor, town council, board of selectmen, what have you. I think we all agree on the fact that the legislation may not have been clear, or saw the foresight of what happens in this type of situation where you have multiple operators looking at one municipality. we can debate the process that, in this case, Springfield is looking to use. I think to Commissioner Cameron's point, I think this letter does reflect the fact that they heard our concerns, they're attempting to address it, while at the same time, trying to stick with a process that they need to go through. I hope that their process is clear. If there was a concern I had at last week's meeting, is how much detail was available to a potential applicant so that they could see a pathway through this process. As I mentioned last week, if there is some benefit to the commission if one or two or multiple operators end up not being a proponent who gets to negotiate with the city, that they might look elsewhere. I think that increases the level of competition that we've all looked for. It may raise the bar in terms of the quality of the applications we're going to get, whether an operator continues to look at Western Mass or may look at another region of the state. I think we benefit from that. But I hear my colleagues, points and addressing the points that were raised. I had a different take on the saving resources, and maybe not the financial piece, but maybe in terms of people time. The use of internal city hall staff to assess plans, permitting issues, taking up the mayor and his staff's time to actually sit down with these operators one-on-one and be able to begin to negotiate out an agreement. So I saw that saving resources, maybe not necessarily on the financial end, because I think you're right, there are ways for the city to be reimbursed and made whole so that it doesn't cost them in the end, but in terms of people time and staff resources at the city level. And again, we have authority, I think, previous to Section 50 in that statute, which gives us authority to lay out some criteria, I believe, through the regulatory process towards the election process. And that is an authority I think we need to make sure we hold on to if we have some concerns about the process as it goes forward, or we step in. It may not necessarily just be Springfield, but step in with another community that is, again, trying to get ahead of the gun, or on a timetable that doesn't coincide with ours, because we have a thoughtful process. It involves a lot of, I'm reminded again every day with people I'm talking to about the seriousness, the diligence of the investigatory process, but looking at someone's financial integrity. Again, I saw the letter from Springfield. We're trying to make those adjustments, and I think it's a step in the right direction. It gives us a chance to continue to move forward, working with them as well as any other community that's going to step up. We'd love it if there was another community that stepped up that all of a sudden had new interest from a new operator. But I'm pleased with the direction. I know, Mr. Chairman, you've had several calls with the city of Springfield, and happy to see that, again, their interest in working with us, I think, is reflected in these initial steps.
Anything else, Commissioner?
I really can't add anything to my two colleagues there. I understand Commissioner Zuniga's concerns, but more broadly, it's pretty clear to me that this statute was drafted to give the commission a role and the ultimate role in making the decisions, and but also heavily investing an important role for the local communities that are going to be directly affected by this. And the interface between those two roles is going to, from time to time, be a scratchy one. And the only way you can remove those scratches and smooth it out is by the kind of conversations we had last week, in which everybody thoughtfully, if with enthusiasm, articulates the views they hold, and then thinks about what we've said, and comes to some resolution that allows us to work together effectively in carrying out our respective roles. And that's how I look at this letter. So I agree with my able colleagues while sharing and understanding some of your concerns.
Yeah, and I'll just add my 2 cents worth too. I also agree the law is not clear about this, but I also agree that the intent of the law clearly was to empower the locals to make this move. But we do have the overriding authority. I don't think there's any question, and I think we exercise that authority when, but only when, one of two things is at issue. One is the integrity of our process, and we raised that, they thought about it, and they concurred with us. And two, if we think a local process is in any way below a very high standard of transparency and integrity. If that were ever to happen, that would, I think, be under our authority to act. And because if we didn't, I think it would impair the whole process. So I think we need to continue to watch not only Springfield, it's not just about Springfield, as I said last week. We need to continue to watch the local process by those two standards. But on this particular one, on the exercise of what process they use, whether we agree with it or not, I think it is appropriate for them to make this step. Our two criteria, however, are two that we need to continue to watch with the utmost care. It's the issue, why we raised the issues about Shevsky. We're still waiting on the Ethics Commission to make a decision, but that is, I think, our legitimate role. Anything else on this? Just the last thing I just would to mention in credit to Springfield, we asked two things of them. We asked that they slow down the process in order that we could work this out, that they not issue their RFP now almost 2 weeks ago, and they agreed, A, and B, we asked them to change their process to accommodate our schedule, and they did that as well, and that says a lot to me about where they're coming from on this. Okay, item number, anything else on that? Item number 4, I don't think that there's much to add on our various searches. They're all underway, some coming to fruition. We have just recently posted the job definition for the Deputy Director of the Enforcement and Investigations and Enforcement Bureau, so if anybody out there has any candidates, we're looking hard. But meanwhile, I think we're getting close on a lot of these things.
Could I just ask for some
Yeah.
guidance here to make sure that I understand the procedure? Commissioner Cameron and I have been working on the staff attorney thing. We're well into the process. The next step will be to select a person who we want to recommend. And it's our understanding that we can go ahead with, select that person, send him or her to the background investigations, and then when that's done, present that single candidate to the commission for approval. Is that an acceptable procedure? That's the one that.
Yeah, because yes, is the answer. It's a little tricky, but I think because you get pretty far down the road, if for some reason or other the commission didn't accept your recommendation, we've already done the background check. But I think we have decided that the process is best if we don't make a name public and we don't get a recommendation to the commission.
And
Yeah.
that's
Unless,
just one to
right,
write back.
right.
Yeah.
Unless it comes to multiple finalists. But I guess even then, we would do multiple background
Yes,
checks
we
first.
would.
Right.
So yes, that is the process.
I should make clear that I'm doing this and getting the able assistance of Commissioner Cameron. We have a single point of authority here, but
Right.
consulting periodically with Commissioner.
And we're getting great collaboration, I understand, from the state police to move quickly on this.
We are. They understand our need to move through the background investigation process quickly with multiple candidates in a
Right.
number of areas, and they are ready, willing, and able to accommodate us there.
Right, great. Number 5, finance and budget. Commissioner Zuniga, do we have topics?
Yeah, just a couple of quick updates. We have gotten an inquiry from one potential host community, or one host community, as to the process and procedure for reimbursing, disbursing the monies that are due for the costs of mitigation or of the agreement process. So I will be coming back to the commission with a quick procedure. I have started written up a one-pager for consideration next meeting. So I will hopefully bring back a procedure that could then be put forward for all host and surrounding communities as to how to submit for reimbursement.
Right. And just for clarification, this is Plainville actually raised in,
Yes.
saying that they do have somebody interested. Plain Ridge is interested, they are an applicant, they have paid their
That's right.
400,000.
That's right.
And Plainville is asking, what's the process to access the 50,000 to no less than 50,000, which is
Yes.
available from that 400 for community mitigation.
Yes.
And we need to put together some simple process, which we will do in the next week or so.
And on that note, our are not final regulations, but what we have issued as our draft regulations contain language relative to that. I am effectively hoping to put more detail in that language and have asked Commissioner McHugh to look at that outline of procedures and again, the hope is to come back next week with a procedure that could be then communicated to everybody, host and surrounding communities, and applicants, because they have to agree in a letter of agreement to the process.
Right.
So that's in the works.
Okay.
I have also, it's come to my attention that the threshold for incidental purchases is about to be increased. It's not yet increased, but the procurement regulations of A&F had a threshold of $5,000 for incidental purchases. That will be increased to $10,000. I'll come back with a recommendation for us to do the same and delegate authority to me under that threshold, which is something we did last when we implemented that.
Okay.
Finally, I'm drafting, Eileen, Director Glovsky has been helping in terms of drafting a scope of work to extend the contract to our consultants. I will be coming back with a draft of that scope of work as we continue to hash out the details as to how to extend that
Right.
contract.
This is for basically the preparation of Phase 2.
Yes.
RFA Phase 2, the regs relating to RFA Phase 2.
Yes.
Right. And again, for information purposes, our Phase 1 of our contract, of the contract that we now have with our consultants, the central product for that was Spectrum and Michael and Carroll, is to draft a comprehensive strategic plan. And that phase will be over in the next 30 days or so, and is to produce this strategic plan, which we will be finalizing. It's incidentally, the consultants have also helped us do Phase 1 of the RFA because we changed that process once after we got started. But most of their work in Phase 2 will be to do Phase 2 of the RFA. If that helped or confused things. Anything else?
No, that's the finance update.
Okay, great. Racing Division.
Mr. Chair, 2 items to report with regard to operations. One is an application process. There's a short timeline here outlining the process for applications, which includes public hearings to be held on September 18th, 10 a.m. in the morning in Plainville, and here in Boston at 2 in the afternoon. It's my understanding that operators come forward with a explanation of what they intend to do for next year. So I think it's an opportunity for us as commissioners to, if possible, to be at these hearings and listen to those presentations.
When are these hearings?
September, I'm sorry,
That's wrong.
that's the
right?
wrong date,
Yeah.
October,
October 18th?
yes,
Okay.
October 18th.
October 18th,
Yeah.
okay.
Yes. I proved that and didn't get that. The other thing I included here was a copy of the application itself. Now, since we do not have, we just have the management piece this year, this has not been a comprehensive review of the application. We intend to do that next year when we're reviewing all the rules and procedures.
Just, excuse me, Commissioner Cameron, we have so many applications.
I'm sorry,
Just to
this-
make sure that everybody
Yes.
knows what applications we're talking about
This
here.
is for a license for the racetracks themselves.
Right.
And
Having nothing to do with casinos. or
Nothing at
slots,
all.
bars.
You're right. That is a good clarification. We are strictly talking racing here today. As you can see, we changed some basic names to, and this was Mr. Charles Kilb, who is the staff attorney for DPL, assisting us during this transition period. Obviously, it's not the State Racing Commission any longer, it's the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. A little more inclusive language to include LLCs and other business entities. Some expanded titles to include officers, members, and managers. We excluded the language pertaining to dogs because that is no longer in effect, and also some gender-neutral language in this application. But again, this has not been a comprehensive review, just some basic changes that have occurred in the last year to make the application more relevant.
And the comprehensive review will be a part of the overall reform process
correct.
that the new
Correct.
director and the advisory
Working group,
commission,
absolutely.
right?
We'll be working on every aspect of racing to bring us in keeping with the best practices in the racing industry to date.
Right.
So that's the first item. And the second item is a waiver for one of our appellants. This is a process we put in place earlier in the racing season. In this particular case, Mr. Marcano was, the tentative decision was to lift his ejection, which will, when that decision becomes final, which will allow him to begin the licensing process to be relicensed. If in fact that's the decision of the judges, the stewards, and the state police in this matter. In order to expedite that process, Mr. Marcano has signed this waiver, which means he will not be objecting to the tentative decision. It is his intention to expedite. It becomes a tentative, rather a final decision, which allows him to start the licensing process. We have used this in the past. It is the same process, and with approval, I will be signing off on that document today and allowing Mr. Marcano to move forward with the licensing process.
Do we need to vote on that? I forget.
We'll take a vote on that matter.
Okay.
I move that we utilize the waiver process, which will allow Mr. Marcano to move forward with his application for license.
Second?
Second.
Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.
That's the end of my racing report, Mr. Chair.
Okay, the only other loose end was, we had gotten this letter, this email from Attorney William Geary about the EPA role. We all discussed it and decided that there's no need for ongoing monitoring. He did make another suggestion, which doesn't have anything to do with him, it's how we manage this, and Commissioner McHugh, you said it might make sense to talk about that a little bit.
Yes, the suggestion in the letter was along the lines of, and the specifics aren't critical, that just so that the commission stays informed about progress, that we ask the people at Suffolk Downs to send us certain communications and responses between themselves and the EPA, so that we can watch what's going on, at least from a distance, and keep ourselves informed. If everything goes according to the consent decree, which, as we discussed last time, is not only detailed, but has a great number of reports and monitoring that the feds are going to do, we'll simply be observers, but at least we'll be up to speed on what's going on. And it seems to me that's worthwhile. We're going to have in the near future some people to help us with these kinds of things, that a paralegal, perhaps an attorney, sort of a law clerk type attorney, perhaps, staff attorney. We'll have the capacity to absorb these reports and flag for the commission anything that we need to be aware of. So I think we ought to think about and put together and perhaps have ready for next meeting, just a list of the reports that we want. We don't need everything, and we'd be overwhelmed by everything. But some of the key reports and communications that go back and forth between the EPA and Suffolk Downs put together a list and ask them to give it to us and talk about that in concrete terms next week.
The other point that the big point that this writer makes, and I think it's an important one, is that we will be overseeing these facilities, and there's things to oversee beyond just the racing or the gambling. You know, all of them will have other relationships having to do with environmental impacts and so on and so forth. And that part of our job should be sort of to keep an eye out, carefully keep an eye out, because if one of our facilities ends up doing something horrible in terms of environmental stuff, that still will reflect on us as well, which I think you're saying is a good
Right.
point, and I agree with.
Right.
In the interest of time, we're going to have so much stuff on our agenda for next week.
There's no.
There's no particular rush, but I think maybe with the new deputy director of racing or the paralegal or something, I think that's a good suggestion, and we can implement that soon. Okay, great. That's it on racing? Okay, item 7, consultant status report. Commissioner O'Toole.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Commissioners. I'm here on behalf of the consultants to provide, I'm here on behalf of the consultants to provide an update. Well, I'd say that obviously you have your homework there in front of you. The consultants delivered the 491-page draft of the strategic plan last week. I know it was a very busy week for the commissioners, but I have received some preliminary feedback from some of the commissioners, and the consultants look forward to discussing additional feedback from the commissioners on the draft plan this week, and then next week during the public meeting. All of the both consulting groups will be represented here next week. They'll be in town for meetings with commissioners on Monday and Tuesday, so they look forward to answering specific questions. But we're still finding a few typos in there, but we'll look forward to talking about the more substantive issues during the course of telephone calls this week and meetings on Monday and Tuesday next week. Also, this past week, they worked with Anderson and Krieger to deliver a document that provides the commission with a recommendation for addressing the comments that came in relating to Phase 1 regulations. They also, conducted research and provided some advice in support of the commission during some of the events that occurred relating to Springfield last week. They've been working with Director Glovsky about logistical aspects of the Phase 1 process to get a better sense for the exact chronology and logistics around that. And they also began drafting an MOU template that can be used for MOUs with other gaming jurisdictions, with law enforcement agencies and other agencies that the Commission will need to enter into agreements with. So I think that's pretty much it. Again, the primary focus has been on the draft strategic plan, and they look forward to wrapping that up, incorporating the Commission's feedback into it over the next week or two.
And we remain on schedule to release the background check forms, basically, the RFA-1 forms, on October 12th, 13th, 14th, which has been the plan all along now, right?
Correct.
We're on that plan for people who are interested. And on next week, we'll also not only have your team here, but also the project management people who are converting this into a project management plan. And we'll be trying to integrate this with that as well. It's going to be a fairly hefty meeting. But we do have a draft of a critical path chart now from the project management folks, and we're trying to square the details with this. So that'll be an interesting one. Have we formally decided, and if not, when do we, that we expect the RFA-1 forms to be back to us 90 days after they are released?
We've not decided on the date. The plan looks at the end of January as the date for returning those. I think that's generally what we've talked about 3 months after the, 2.5 months.
Yeah, 3 months.
3.5
Yeah.
months.
No,
So,
I-
yeah, we're
2.5,
releasing,
end of December, isn't it?
It's end of December.
Yeah.
I
you
believe,
said
I'm sorry, because I was just looking at this earlier. I believe the response time for the RFA Phase 1 is currently 1 month. 1 month, I believe so.
Well, that's not,
well,
I
that's
can-
not what the
that's
plan
not in any
says.
of, that's not in any of the stuff we've published, but
No, but there's language in the strategic plan that,
Well,
I don't have my
we
copy
need-
with me, but.
We need to consider that.
Yeah.
And we need to consider that next week as part of,
yeah, that might be just a question to ask. I think what we've been assuming, certainly I have when I've done planning and talking to people, is that people would have 90 days. Presumably there'd be an option for an extension if for some reason or other people couldn't get it done in 90 days. But maybe we should ask the consultants, is that the right date to target?
Well, I think we could also anticipate that some of the applicants will complete it much
Sooner, right.
sooner than that in
Right.
attempts to expedite the process.
Right.
You know, some
Yeah,
could
which is
be
fine.
gathering, compiling their information right now.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure they are, people who've gone through this before. But I mean, still, if you could maybe just double check
Yes.
with them, and, because we don't want to set an unreasonable outside deadline, but I'm pretty sure 90 days is what we've been thinking.
could I ask just a process question as we look forward to hearing from the consultants next week and looking forward to examining this plan further and look forward to the project planners incorporating all of this into a flow chart. When are we going to talk about sort of major themes? That's, here's what I'm getting at. As I look at this, and I must say this is tentative because I haven't had a chance to really come to grips with this the way I'd like to. This proceeds in an entirely linear fashion, and I understand why we're doing that. But particularly the discussions we've had over the last 3 weeks internally and with external partners and others who are interested in this, makes me wonder if there aren't pieces of this that don't have to be exactly linear. In other words, if we are going to try to give communities a heads up about the kinds of things that we're going to look for in a host community agreement, is that a subject we could take out of a linear progression, attack early, at least at a high level, and say, okay, and come to a decision, and say, okay, this is what we're going to look for in the host community agreement. We'll flesh this out with regulations in detail, but as you go ahead and plan your relationship, you can focus on these kinds of things.
Like we've just been talking about with
Yes,
the host community,
right.
referendum, the host community agreement, right?
Well, not only the mechanics, but, for example, are we going to be interested in architectural design? Is that something we're going to be interested in as part of what we're going to be looking at in a final agreement? We have the ability, not only, we have the requirement to consider the criteria that are set out in the statute in looking at the plan that we're presented with, but we also have the ability to create other things that we're interested in having in those agreements as well. And perhaps we do a service to the communities to have those things, at least at a high level, identified and solidified before we get to the process of drafting the regulations to support them. Perhaps we would do the surrounding communities and the developers a service if we answered in a committed fashion what we are prepared to entertain and approve requests for compensation for, i.e., if a surrounding community wants money for negotiations and impact studies, That's in the statute, that's pretty clear. If they want money up front for a new fire engine, that might be something entirely different. And if we could identify those kinds of things, it would allow people to move forward with their planning, even though this precise content of regulations was yet to be decided. That's what I mean by nonlinear. And we've talked about this before in a general sense, but the fact is that people are attempting to get these agreements lined up. They are, in many cases, ahead of us, and are going to stay ahead of us in a way, and should stay ahead of us. But we, well, should stay ahead of us within parameters. But we can help them by identifying some of these major themes that we're going to be looking for. Maybe, at least I wonder when the right time to discuss that is.
I thought of, I think that's an excellent point, and I thought of a version of what you're alluding to in the context of what's currently in the strategic plan, which is a couple of options for letting out the licenses in different regions. I think the strategic plan does mention that we could have the option to, and we should entertain and look at the pros and cons of letting out different licenses from different regions at different times. But I think it doesn't flesh out, which I think it should, letting out the slots parlor license first. And the way to take advantage of that would be to do along the lines of what Commissioner McHugh is suggesting, not wait until all the regulations for phase 2 are final, but perhaps think about issuing regulations for different pieces in some kind of sequential or staggered way. I think those options need to be explored. I guess the first real time to do that would be next week in what's termed an interactive planning session, because we could start looking at what the schedule, what the baseline schedule does when we change some assumptions, or at least start brainstorming about that. But I think that's very important for us to consider.
Just to pick up on that, I raise that now because I wonder if, and I'm simply thinking out loud, I wonder if we're not taking on too much if we try to both do the conceptual discussion, i.e. should we do this, how much, should we do a sequential thing or put the slots parlor first? Or should we take chunks of work and do the chunks of work before we do the other chunks of work? Are we trying to do too much of it at the same time we're trying to fit all that into a schedule? Maybe not. Maybe the scheduling implications of doing those things is something we need to consider in deciding upon their utility. I don't know.
I think this is something we're going to have to continue to think about, but I think there are three very different categories of things. I think the process ones, like we talked about, trying to give cities and towns and developers a sense, clarify this referendum, host community agreement, vetting process, that I think is something that we could step out of line, do kind of an advisory way without any problem. The substance of what our criteria are going to be, for example, design, that's one that would be hard for us to do kind of quickly offline, because that's something we probably want to have hearings on, and this big open-ended question about whether and how much, you would consider design. And the issue of sequencing licenses is even a bigger issue that, again, we could at some point take it out of sequence and think about that one, but we'd have to put some real serious time and energy into that. So I think process, the smaller process stuff, yes, I think we can do that, and we have done that, and we should do more of that in making people sure have a pretty good idea of what's coming down the line in terms of process. I'm less clear on, trying to take out the substance of the standards that we will be using until we really have a chance to really vet those, which is probably about the time they're in the critical path chart.
Well, that may be. And you may be absolutely right. I would just like to spend a few minutes
Yeah.
talking about that. And in the context, let's just take where we are with Springfield right now. and I suspect they're not alone. I suspect there are other negotiations for host community agreements going on right now. And the concern is that even if they wait until we have finished the vetting process to do a vote, unless we have clarified what our principal points of interest are, what kinds of things we're going to be looking for in the agreement, we still risk the possibility of a vote on a document that doesn't comply with the regulations we ultimately issue in terms of subject matter. And it seems to me that we ought to think about how to, whether we can, create a structure that would minimize the likelihood that that happens. I'm not sure it can be done either, but I would just like to spend a little time talking about it.
Well, in the schedule as it presently stands, there's not really, while we're doing the background checks, which will substantially be outsourced, that will not be tying up our time very much.
Right.
We are scheduled to be doing precisely that, fleshing out the regs for RFA 2, which is where we will put in, here's whether we're going to consider design, and here's how much we're going to consider. So you might have a freak circumstance where somebody gets their background check done earlier than, at the very earliest possible, and at that point, we might not be done with our regs, our RF2 regs. But that's sort of an idiosyncratic case. That's the way it's scheduled right now. The two do, I think, couple properly.
But we have, we've already talked about a process, and I think a process is being worked on, a protocol is being worked on, Kathy, now, in which we take subject matters, for example, that the Phase 2 regs are going to encompass, and then we have a discussion about the policy issues those subject matters are going to raise, so that the regulation writers have some guidance as to what regulations they're going to write. And that's going to raise some more policy questions, and so we come back after that first cut and look at some of the policy implications that the first cut has produced. And so the sequence of this is likely to be policy considerations, drafting, until we get down to the fine line. And somewhere in there, and it's in the context of that process, that I wonder if we couldn't isolate some important policy issues that, having isolated them, and tell the regulation writers now go write the regs to deal with them, gives at the same time guidance to cities and towns in their planning.
I was going to attempt to clarify what you just did, which is just that. By the time we issue, in this process of regulation, policy writing and promulgating, as soon as we have policy decisions, if those policy statements should be made public as a guidance to communities, that would gain time.
Right.
Because it would allow communities to incorporate that in the process that they are going. It would allow designers for applicants to incorporate those in the project that they're formulating. And they would not have to wait until the regulations are final and promulgated. They could at least get the direction that this commission is going.
Yeah. Thoughts?
I think it's a perfect opportunity next week when we meet with our gaming consultants to actually flesh out these issues and what they've seen in other jurisdictions, what were some of the lessons learned in trying to do this efficiently and yet properly.
It's interesting, reading part of the strategic plan that I've gotten through so far, there's obviously some very detailed information and suggestions as to organization. And then I came across a page almost top to bottom of what I'd call general policy questions that were, I was like, am I supposed to write yes? Am I supposed to write no? And, at what point do we scud? And it was a lengthy set of kind of these open-ended policy questions. I follow up on Commissioner McHugh's point that we have communities that are moving ahead, in some cases surrounding communities, starting to talk to operators about components of a host community agreement. And I have a general concern that a lot of the evaluation criteria we're going to look at in a final license application may not be criteria that is necessarily going to wind up in a host community agreement, but I don't want the host community to be neglectful of that information. I mean, one of the components we can evaluate, and we can talk about this a little later in the AIA piece, is, a LEED certified building. How is that playing within the conversations between an operator and the local host community? I'm not saying follow us to the letter of the law at this point, but
Right.
as you're framing your host community negotiation, keep in mind what you may consider important criteria in that may not be the criteria by which we're going to evaluate the license application. So I don't know if that kind of falls into that
It does.
same silo,
the
but
same-
it's
the same thing.
a general discussion, maybe putting out more information, kind of informational basis to say, this is what this statute clearly outlines, or this is what this statute clearly outlines, and the regs to follow later.
Yeah. I think I agree that next week will be a start. First of all, there's a ton of those questions, as you said, in here, and we got our hands full with these. But when we do it, we can start talking about that. I hope that next week, or the week, not next week, but the week after, or shortly, we'll have our critical path chart, and we can look at that chart and say, right here is where we need to stop and take a deep breath and try to pull out a bunch of critical issues like that, and focus on them. I think it's a really good idea, and we haven't accommodated that need at all yet. Just drawing up the list of what those issues are would be a considerable job.
Yes, yes, it is.
And sorting it by priority too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Anything else on that? Okay. I guess we are, is there anything else that you've got on your?
No, I would just say, Chairman, that I totally agree. I mean, I think we all recognized early on that the Phase 2 regulations will be much more complicated. Their process will be much more complicated and require a lot more interaction between the consultants and the commissioners, because there are so many policy decisions to be made in the Phase 2 process. But I think it makes lots of sense to prioritize those, create that list and prioritize them. I think it will make it a more efficient process as well.
And that might be something to also give them a heads up to be able to think about, how do they anticipate this iterative process working and the nonlinear step that Commissioner McHugh was talking about.
I'll do that today, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The Phase 1 regs we referred to generally, do you want to just reiterate again
Yes,
where we're at in that process?
As Kathy O'Toole just mentioned, the consultants, Gaming and Law, delivered a document to me yesterday afternoon, which I'm going to circulate, although it's not in its final stages, in which all the comments are listed. They're listed in the with a nexus to the section of the regulations to which they apply. The comment is there, the recommendation as to what we do with the comment is there, and in some places there's disagreement, and I want to spend some time with them trying to see if I can figure out what the basis for the disagreement is, and deliver to you a second document on Friday with as many of those disagreements resolved as I can, with a recommendation as to what we do. So you'll have both the raw material and the recommendation. And then we take it up on Tuesday. Now this, my sense is, the document is about, the document's a lengthy document. The comments were very thoughtful. There are no game changers in the comments. But we had the help of a lot of careful readers who went through and picked out a variety of places where they suggest improvements. I think that we'll be able to get through this in fairly short order on Tuesday, having in mind that the main event
Right.
is that. But if I sense it's gonna take us longer, if we're gonna, I'll try and give everybody a heads up if I think it's gonna take us a while to get through it. I guess that's the best thing.
Okay. Well, if we didn't do it next week, does that change our?
It does.
Yeah,
It
so,
does.
so we should try hard to do it if we can.
We have to
Yeah.
do it next week. The question is.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah. do
How
we-
big a deal will it be?
Yeah, how big a deal will it be?
Right.
Do we need to start the meeting a little earlier?
Do we serve dinner?
Right. Or breakfast.
Or breakfast.
Or
yeah.
breakfast.
Yeah. Okay.
I think not. I think this is going to be, we had the benefit, as I say, of very thoughtful comments, but they were precise, so I think we'll be able to get through this pretty quickly, even though the document's lengthy.
Okay. Okay, our quote, Wall Street project, Commissioner Zuniga, you want to give us an update on?
Yep, just, I have been doing, conducting effectively an RFI process, just talking to people who are potentially qualified to help us do a financial type of assessment or research or introductions in order to foster more involvement from the financial community, which is the genesis of this topic. I will be very close with the help of some staff people to have a document ready to be put out to request responses. I'm thinking this could be done quickly because this would be a small procurement, and therefore we would be soliciting 3 quotes. And the basic question is, tell us what strategy steps we should consider in order to accomplish the goal that we want to, which is this idea of fostering interest or drumming up additional interest, or maybe there's already the interest that it's going to be here. That document will be ready in the next few days, and the idea again is to put it out quickly and elicit responses and bring those back to the commission so that they could be analyzed as to what the best strategy should be.
Right. We talked about this last week, and Commissioner Zuniga and I have been working on this, but we did push back pretty hard to say, is there really a value add here? Is there, or not? Is this, let's not kid ourselves. If there's nothing we can really get out of this, it's going to take time, it's going to take money, and we got some very articulate expressions about where value add could be. But they also were different. You know, some people had a different sense. Some investment bankers had a different sense. So from others, some people focused. One focused just generally. Spectrum originally just talked generally, sort of shotgunning to all kinds of financial markets.
Mm-hmm.
Another was quite specific, as I mentioned, I think last week, on equity players who might need some more selling, and another was much more focused on our present players and what their needs might be in getting financing, and on developers who might be on the sidelines in Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
So very sort of different strategies. The net of it was, we certainly were convinced that it's probably worth doing. It certainly can't hurt, and it probably can add some value, but we're going to try to really force the posers in a speedy process, but an interesting process, to tell us articulately what their strategy is and where they think the real value add is. And then we'll talk about those at a meeting and make the decision as quickly as we possibly can.
That's exactly the idea.
Great. Okay, item number 8. Let's see, community and/or development outreaches, or outreach and responses. We talked about the request that came from Plainville about the community mitigation money. Is there anything else?
I wanted to raise one issue that was embodied in copious notes that no longer are here. Anyway, I was over in Winthrop last week. Yes, here they are. I was over in Winthrop last week, and that police chief over there raised Terrence Delahanty, raised a couple of interesting things that fit in with our baseline study that we're about to do. He wondered, I mentioned to the group that was assembled, the Chamber of Commerce breakfast, and I mentioned to the group that was assembled that we are going to do a baseline study statewide of conditions now so that we have a delta, observable changes that move forward. But the local cities and towns should be doing that as well. And they've already started that process. They have a committee and the like. But he raised two questions that I thought were worth including in our study. One is, are we planning to reach out to police departments in other jurisdictions that are adjacent to gaming facilities to try and get whatever data they have about the changes that they've observed and how they observe them, to help focus the kind of planning effort that local cities and towns might use. And the other thing that was more amorphous, but equally, if not more fascinating, and that is, as we do our study, are we going to correct for a bad economy? His point was that in a bad economy, certain kinds of antisocial behavior rises, particularly economic crimes. And therefore, just doing a baseline now about various kinds of things may not give a true picture of where the baseline normally belongs. In other words, if we have 100 robberies in a period of time in a given community, in this economy, and the economy improves, and the robbery rate goes down or stays the same, let's say, when a gaming facility arrives, can we safely say that the gaming facility has had no impact on the community? And I thought that that was something that we can't answer, but that we ought to try and have the folks who are doing our study think about, as I'm sure they will.
Yeah.
So
This reminds me of my old life, talking to academics about how you study things like this, but it's, what you just got through saying is true of housing starts, of
Right.
job starts, of
Right.
payroll,
Right. Right.
restaurant use,
it
it's true.
opens up that whole
Right.
window, and then the correction.
And the study will have to try to control for those variables, and it's,
Right.
social science research is an imprecise art, but
Right.
hopefully, I'll get to the RFI in a few minutes, but hopefully we'll get people that are sophisticated enough to
Right.
try to control for those variables. It certainly is on our radar for
Right.
that. The Chelsea questions are still in process, right?
Yes, there's a stack of frequently answered, no, not frequently answered, frequently asked questions.
Rarely answered, but frequently asked.
I'm trying to make them frequently answered
Right.
questions, but we'll try to
All right.
get to that.
Right, great. 8B, acting ombudsman, that would be I. I guess we talked about Plainville. That was one inquiry that came in from the town administrator. We talked about that. We also got a letter that I think all the commissioners got, which was pursuant to our published protocol about how communities and developers will now react with the public sector if they become applicants. We got a letter from Plain Ridge just detailing some of their work that had gone on prior to this protocol being in place, which was good to hear. We're not going to jump on anybody for talking, before we got started. But a couple, Suffolk Downs also has had some steps with public agencies. Hopefully now, all the requests to meet with public agencies will be channeled through our contact points. But this was just a nice update from Plain Ridge. The last thing is, that I gave you kind of late in the game, is the updated draft of the kind of protocol that we have on our website. We've changed the dates a little bit because we now know at least a couple of our deadlines have been met on the good news side, so the dates have moved up a little bit. There are a few other changes just to make this memo up to date. If you had a chance to, there's nothing very controversial. If you want to look at the chart on page 2, that's really where the biggest change is. That we have the best possible shot that we've been talking about, beginning to issue license would be next fall, but the very likely shot, as opposed to the least likely shot, the very best shot would be spring, probably March, April of 2014. That's the major change. So if you had any, the rest of it was just kind of bringing it up to speed that we're now actually in the application process. We're not just designing the application process. We hope to have an ombudsman on board by the end of this month, a few other little things like that. I don't know if there's really a need to vote particularly, but did you have,
I just wondered if it, I think we do need to update this, Mr. Chairman, and I just wondered if it wouldn't be better to wait for a week until we have next week's discussion. I would really like to push on some of these dates. They may not change, but I would really like to see, I'd really like to explore those dates a little bit and see if there isn't some way we could tinker with them and change them. And so, for that reason, I would like to wait a week until we have that discussion.
even though these are in pretty broad ranges,
I understand that.
even in that?
But maybe we could even include another category that would be helpful. I don't know.
Okay.
I just had a quick note of, you've made the changes down in the box below, but reflecting those. in the
Oh, good
commentary
point.
as
Sorry,
well.
good
But
point. Yeah.
I think the commission McHugh's point of
Yeah.
not finalizing it, and see if we can tinker a little bit further.
I agree, because we're already talking about some areas where
Right.
there may be room to do that. So I would concur that we hold off until we
Okay.
get through our strategic plan conversations and
Okay.
specific conversations on the timeline.
Okay, that was it for 8B. 8C I referred to, we're moving along pretty quickly on our ombudsman. Director Driscoll, do you have anything hot for us?
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
I just have one main update today, which is that, as you all know, we signed the agreement last week with our website and logo development company. We had our first meeting already last week. This week, they've already been busy building out the project management chart, which has already been developed, up online, ready to go. They said we'll see it over the next couple of the days, start to really fill up with time frame of activities. This week, they
Are
also...
you talking about the same project management chart that PMA is working on?
No,
or
this is,
a simpler one?
this is just for the website and logo development,
Hmm.
so just for Jack Rabbit, that's it.
Right.
And they said that this week they'll deliver to us
Oh,
both.
so their own work timeline. I'm sorry, okay, I
Yes,
misunderstood.
sorry. And so they said that this week they'll get to us their overall strategic brief on what we can expect over the next couple of weeks, and then also a creative brief on what the logo process will do. And those are two things that they expect to get to us by the end of the week. I have a conference call with them scheduled for Thursday. So, it will be a significant amount of work, but my goal is to keep it moving as quickly as possible, to keep everybody as mobilized as possible on it so that we can possibly, so that no timelines get extended if we can avoid it.
Will those documents, will you circulate those documents?
Mhm.
Is there a time, maybe it'll be at a public meeting, when we'll have a sort of a brainstorming session about website design and logo choices and stuff, where we all,
Yeah, so basically, what I expect from these briefs is some sort of layout of what the process will be exactly.
Okay.
And first things first will be whatever the creative process will be and what they need from us for logo design. once they complete that, they said they'll really start moving on website design, because obviously the logo design will be such a huge part of what the website design is. They told me, however, that doesn't mean that they won't be developing pages and putting thought process, because I didn't want them to hold up website development, because the creative process can start to get complicated, particularly when, there's so many opinions that need to go into it, so. But they promised me that they can do both concurrent, but website will obviously be afterwards, creatively, for obvious reasons.
Is there, just in the meantime, while we're getting this done, it's gonna take however long it takes, a month or two, whatever it takes to get, probably more to get it done.
Yeah, maybe.
In the meantime, the website we have is the website we have,
Mm-hmm.
and is there somebody who has the job of making sure that everything stays current? For example, I just redid my welcoming letter, which I realized was outdated, and this protocol is outdated.
Right.
Is there somebody who's keeping an eye on that? and
Yeah,
making sure
so basically, it's when you had sent us the welcome letter, that got updated. And for example, once the timeline was redone today, we're waiting for that to be completed, but we've already had discussions to make sure that we update every element of the website that
Okay.
needs to be updated. So I'm doing that the best I can. I mean, the only time I ask for some assistance is, like, let's say it's time to take down a job opportunity, if there's a closing or something like that, if you can just sort of, whoever's overseeing that particular job, just to give an FYI, and we'll make sure we take that down. But I'm happy to take all of that feedback.
And maybe change the photographs. I think the photographs have been the same, haven't they?
Yeah,
Might be
we can
time-
do that.
Might be time to make those.
Great photographs.
Right.
Which
But there's
photographs?
The ones that cycle through on the
Oh,
homepage.
okay, yeah.
It's got this, the governor signing the bill, and that's kind of ex post facto, and our appointments, and,
Although that's a good link to the actual bill, so that's
Yeah.
why the photograph is there,
right.
but
Well, anyway, it's just something
it's a
to
good
think
link.
about.
Happy to replace it.
Yeah, I thought maybe, Mr. Chair, you didn't like your photo.
I don't like my
Oh, I
photos. I
see.
don't like any of my photos.
Not en-
And it's
not
the
enough
media's
airbrush
fault, damn
material.
it, it's not me. Okay, anything else on
Just-
Commissioner
I
Driscoll?
have something that falls under the category of our frequently answered questions or frequently asked questions. I'd like to work with the two of you to begin to delve into the statute and look at some of the job requirements in terms of who's eligible to work in a gaming casino. I mean, the law is pretty explicit. I think as people get excited about the prospects of employment by a casino anywhere else, it'd behoove us to kind of set
Right.
people's expectations.
Mhm.
And lay that out in a pretty, as much as we can decipher out of the statute, just to say, if you were thinking about, pushing a cash truck, around a casino, chances are, if you have a serious arrest record, that's not gonna happen. Again, just kind of setting people's expectations out.
Disqualifiers.
Yeah.
You mean, just so people don't sit around for the next couple of years getting all excited, knowing that they really.
Job opportunity may not come.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that ties
It's a
into the
serious
discussion
downer.
we had about the schools that may offer to train people for casino jobs,
Right.
for which they're not eligible.
Yeah,
exactly.
So-
Well, that would be a great.
And that's part of that work, going back to working with the community colleges.
Right.
I think it behooves us to kind of lay out the expectations, so.
Right.
Right.
To your point, they're not sitting around waiting for that opportunity to
Right.
come along.
But I think if we spin it positively, the talk about the development process, that we're, the pipeline that we're gonna be creating, and the training that we're gonna be creating, the retraining that we're gonna be creating, then you make the negative sort of an incidental, not the,
Absolutely.
the barrier's an incidental, not the
Right.
lead.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that'd be a great project. Anything else? Okay, the Diversity and Inclusion Forum, there was one wrinkle. Former city councilor Bruce Bowling died recently, and his funeral service is the same time as our forum. We talked with Ron Marlowe, who is organizing the forum for us, and talked about the possibility of postponing it, because there are a fair number of people who want to go to Bruce's service. But Ron felt that the best thing to do in Bruce's memory is to have this and promote the objectives that this is about. So we are going to go ahead. We have about 170 people signed up, and it's tomorrow morning at 8:30. So hopefully that'll be a good one. AIA, Commissioner?
Sure. We've got a very thoughtful letter from the folks at AIA about, I think after you spoke with their group about offering their assistance and looking at building design, sustainability, making these facilities as energy efficient as possible. I spoke with John, their executive director, scheduled him to come in at our meeting, one of our meeting dates in October. At the same time, I'm taking out some of the language in the legislation which deals with building design that leads certification standards, sending it to them and kind of giving them that is information for them to strategize and think about. I think he's got a group of his board that is trying to look at this issue or look at how they may be helpful.
Great. And we talked about this might be one of a couple things. We might also have an education forum in this. Is it sort of implicit in your mind that this would be the first step and there'd be another? Or
This would certainly be the first step in kind of seeing where the conversation and discussion
see if there seems
takes
to be
us.
enough to pump up to a forum. Okay, great. Number 9, the research agenda. We have, I hope we will post the RFI today, if it isn't up tomorrow. Yeah. And how long does that have to stay posted for?
I forget, but there was a timeline in the document.
Proposal, I can't remember, yeah. Okay.
It had been three weeks or thereabouts,
Yeah,
3 or 4
okay.
weeks.
Okay. So that's all been finalized, that's finished and will be posted today. Did we get the guy who had the idea of doing the research project in Hampden County? It was a fellow you knew, he spoke to us out in Springfield. He wanted to do the community health study, wanted us to be a partner in the community health study,
Oh.
Hampden County.
Yeah.
He was going to send us the contacts for Pew Charitable Trust and Robert Wood
I don't
Johnson.
think we received that yet, but I can follow up.
Okay, I could.
You offered to, I think, make a.
Well, because I wanted to talk to them about our research project,
Right.
and we'll see whether or not, they would consider
We can
being,
tie that in.
being a part of ours.
Sure.
And I may have heard from him, but I missed it if I did, so if you could follow up, that'd be great.
Yep.
That was the gentleman who talked to us at the open meeting.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and he was originally asking us to partner in his study, which was only Hampden County, but got very excited about being a part of a statewide study, and we thought maybe
Right.
Pew and
Right.
Robert Wood Johnson could help fund it.
Yep.
Okay, so. All right, I think that's it. Anything else on research or on item 10? Any other business? We made up for last time.
Excellent.
Okay, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you.
Good job, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.